Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our winter webinar. We are really excited that you could join us. So this is Liz Harper speaking. I am the director of the Employee Benefits Plan Group, and I am a partner at Sobel & Company. I've joined the firm almost 9 years ago, and our group is growing, and we're really excited that you were able to join us today to hear about the 7 fiduciary traps to avoid in your 401k or 403b plan. I am really excited that we have Brian Gregoff from AEPG joining us. He is the Vice President of Retirement Plan Solutions, and he his main objective is for people to know the most they can about retirement plans and preparedness for retirement. So Brian, he works closely with the design of retirement plans, and he also is very key to customize plans in accordance with all the relevant laws. Brian is responsible for managing the non-discrimination testing, annual reporting, and trust statement productions for over 1,500 retirement plans. He currently is involved in the administration and consultative support for plan sponsors ranging in size from just about 100 to more than 100,000 participants. And some of the plans have assets that are exceeding $100 million. Brian has a lot of accreditations behind him. He's AIF certified and QKA. He is a qualified 401k administrator. Again, Brian is from AEPG, and we're really glad that he's going to be walking us through the traps to avoid with retirement plans. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I'm happy to be here to speak to you about this. I'd have to say, just a little quick background. I've been, working with retirement plans for over 22 years now. I did spend 11 years at Merrill Lynch, where I was a vice president overseeing their compliance department. Been here at APG now for almost 11 years. And I have to say, probably the last 5 years has been by far the most interesting time that I've spent working with retirement plans. Interesting just because there's just been a lot more guidance, a lot more need for plan sponsors to be able to, kind of put some attention towards their retirement plans that they're running. And if you will indulge me for a minute, I'm going to kind of go into a couple reasons why we're seeing this in the industry today. One, I'll go through just some statistics that I think is going to really kind of open your eyes to some of the challenges that plan sponsors are facing today. And then two, I'm going to talk about some legislative and regulatory requirements that are also leading towards why these traps are critical to avoid. And then we'll get to those 7 fiduciary traps that I know you're all anxiously waiting. Just quickly, happy to take questions. You can definitely complete within the webcast. You have a question section. You can write under the question section your question that you're having. We'll try to get to all those questions right after we finish the presentation. So please don't hesitate to do that if you have a question as we're going through. And just get to the next one. You hit the down arrow. Down arrow. One quick. Click on the presentation, not this. All right. Sorry, a little technical difficulty there. So what I wanted, just real quick, just again, I was just telling you just some of the statistics that we wanted to kind of highlight. One, 69% of workers have access to some sort of retirement plan today. 58% of those workers have access to some DC plan, some type of DC plan. And 69% of those workers with access to those DC plans participate in those DC plans today. So we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of plans, sponsors offering qualified 401k, 403b type plans. these days. Obviously, if you go back years ago, it was all about the defined benefit plan, but really those times have changed. Defined benefit plans took definitely a slowdown for many years. Oddly enough, we're starting to see a little bit trend back up on some of those defined benefit type plans, but still really the main area of focus for most plan sponsors is to create that defined contribution plan. I think the challenge there lies in the sense of, when you remember a defined benefit plan, it was all about the employer's responsibility to fund, employer's responsibility to meet the funding benefit requirements and all that sort. Now with defined contribution plans, it's really put on the participant, right? The participant needs to manage their own assets, and although the plan sponsor has to give everybody the proper needs and tools in order to manage their accounts, at the end of the day, the participant still has that responsibility to make some of those selections. But when dealing with those retirement plans, it's become a challenge for a lot of plan sponsors. One, because as you can see here, there's just such generational differences when you're looking at them. In 2016, there was 76 million baby boomers, 59 million Generation Xers, and 80 million millennials. So, when you really look at across, your retirement plan, you're dealing with so many different types of individuals, so many different ways that they're thinking about saving for retirement. We'll talk about some of those. And so many different ways that you're going to need to communicate with those individuals. So plan sponsors really have a challenge on their hands. They can't just really set a plan and let it be and hope that everything works out, because everybody needs something different nowadays. And really, it's plan sponsors' fiduciary responsibility to be able to, give everybody, those tools that they need to manage those plans. Obviously, you can't talk about generational differences without talking about technology. And technology is important here just because communication with retirement plans, in my opinion, has become and is going to continue to become one of the largest areas that plan sponsors and fiduciaries really need to focus on. Reason being is we're in a retirement crisis. Less than 15% of the people in this country today are properly saving for retirement. And, that's really scary when you think about 85% of the population or of individuals in this country might not be where they need to be for, and able to retire. It's kind of scary to think about that. So when you think about education and communication, and, you really need to be able to leverage those different types of mediums. Baby boomers obviously really look to folks, they're still want the emails, want face-to-face communication, obviously maybe communication through their computers or laptops. But millennials go on any train or any bus, public train or public bus, and look at any millennial. Every single one of them is probably looking down on their cell phone or on their iPad. So it's really about how to communicate to them along those lines. Everybody uses, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, different things such of that nature, and using those things are really important. There's one provider I know out there today that, their communication is text messaging now, right? So they, you get a raise, or they see you get a raise, or you have some type of change in your status on your participant account. They'll text that participant and say, hey, we see you got a raise in your income. Maybe it's smart to think about raising your retirement savings contribution nowadays. So, it's pretty interesting to understand that, communication and technology is really taking a big step in how you need to manage your 401k plan. Communication preferences, we kind of talked about this, but really what's interesting here is one, look all the way to the left, the consultation column. I think it's interesting to note that that's number one. Regardless of the age of individuals, they all want that consultation now. To be able to meet with somebody, speak with somebody, to be able to get some guidance or advice is really becoming the new norm across retirement plans, especially these defined contribution plans. It's a struggle. Participants really don't know, and we'll show you in a little bit. They don't really know how much they should be saving for retirement or what the proper income levels are, or retirement savings levels, or where they should be at retirement. And honestly, having that type of education or guidance where you can meet with an advisor or somebody and speak one-on-one with them is becoming sort of a big area of focus for plan sponsors and fiduciaries to be able to offer their participants. Obviously, on the other side, you can see some of the other statistics here. Online tools, important, still very important. Educational webinars, they're starting to go, to decline. That's the one right in the middle, 22% for age 50 to 59. 19% for ages 20 to 29. The problem with these is, and you all probably know, you can hold an education webinar, get everyone in a room, talk to them about all these great things, and then everybody leaves that education webinar, goes back to their desk, and get so busy with their work or have other personal issues going on, and never really get around to really making any of those changes that they need to. So really the days of sort of those big education sessions, getting everyone in a room, talking it through, they're kind of going away now. We're starting to see a trend towards removing those types of pieces. But print communications, I think what's interesting here is a big variation, right? Again, going back to talking about some of the generational differences, pretty decent swing on that. Some still want that print communication. Others don't really care so much about it. They're really more on their, that technology side. You can see that from the age differences there. Number one financial goal by age group. I found this really interesting, right? Boomers are they're thinking about, hey, I need to save for retirement because, it's getting closer to that time that they're going to be retiring. And unfortunately, they're going to start thinking about that. Number two, financial goal for them, paying off debt. Number three, just getting by. But if you look at the millennials, it's kind of different, right? Millennials are really thinking about, hey, I just graduated college, or I just got a job and bought a house. I need to pay off my debt. Some of them are just trying to get by, right? Still creating their careers and getting by. And then, saving for retirement obviously falls at a very, very low rate there from those millennial side. But, what's important about that is, there's no better opportunity for somebody to save for retirement than starting as early as they possibly can. So really getting that messaging out and that communication out to those millennials about saving early is really, really important. And again, here's where you got to really think about how to communicate with them. Some of the top three milestones or catalysts to focus on saving for retirement. The age 50 to 59, they look at current events or the economy, right, and start saving for retirement. So things such as that nature. Obviously, the last couple of days week has been a very interesting time in the economy and the markets, right? But that's really their number one driver. Health situations, right? Somebody starts having health situations, they start thinking about saving for retirement, and then reaching that certain age is, as we talked about earlier, right? They're getting older. They know, hey, time for me to start saving for retirement. We really need to start thinking about and looking at doing something. On the other side, with the age 20 to 29-year-olds, what's driving them saving for retirement is really sort of life events, becoming a parent, marriage, right? You can see, two of the options there, right? So when they start having kids or getting married, they start thinking about their future and what's entailed. So, again, thinking about from a communication perspective, from a guidance perspective, how do you leverage those areas of events that happen with those types with individuals, and then kind of build on those to be able to help them, focus on their retirement savings component. Fewer than half of participants know how much they should have saved for a comfortable retirement. I think this is kind of funny, just because hey, you can see 91% know what their credit scores are on average. 90% know what their optimal body weight should be. 77 know what their blood pressure is. 64% know what the cholesterol level is, but only 43%, less than half, really know how much you should save for a comfortable retirement. And I do a lot of education guidance sessions, and one of the first questions I'll ask is, do you know how much you should be saving for retirement? And most will look at me with a blank stare, and obviously they don't really understand. They don't really know. But I think that's an important component, and that's a component that's really being looked at very seriously nowadays because, that's really where it opens up individuals' eyes on the need for saving for retirement. So much that, there's been a large discussion in the industry about making sure that participants, and if you could pretty much go to any record-keeping website that you're logged into today, or and number one thing you'll probably see is a retirement savings calculator, right? And it basically shows you that based on how much you have saved and the amount of time you have left to save for retirement and how much you're saving and an estimated, growth in your account of 8%, it's going to say, hey, by the time you retire, you're going to have $800,000 put away. And $800,000 over 25 years of retirement is going to equate to a $2,000 a month, like type of annuity payout you're able to get on that. Is that going to be enough for you to live on, right? And that's and that's where they're trying to break that down even further, because people can relate to a monthly income, right, much better than just a total retirement savings number. So that's really becoming a very, very important aspect for plan sponsors to consider. Also, cross-generational regret, not saving enough for retirement. I mean, this shows it here. I mean, I think pretty clearly, if you really add up a great deal, some and little, you can see the majority, 91, 92% kind of regret not saving enough for retirement. And, that's, when you think about that, how do we now get in front of them, to make sure that they can understand and see the importance of that savings. Participants are looking for help with their 401k plans. You can see here, going back 70%, all the way far left there, would like personalized investment advice for my 401k. Because again, most don't understand, where they should be, how much they should be saving, what they should be invested in, how much is the proper saving amount for retirement to meet my goals. And, having that personalized advice is becoming, sort of a big area of focus. So much so that really the one area that's taking off right now within the industry is something called financial wellness. We all know about, health wellness and all that sense, but now financial wellness is becoming another big aspect to be able to help employees on. And then the arrow right in the middle, I agree with the following statement. It's impossible to save enough money in my 401k to make a comfortable retirement possible. It's interesting that 49% think it's impossible to do that. And, it's a matter of those fiduciaries and plan sponsors helping them understand that it's not impossible. You just have to set your goals and to make those. And then I think the last slide here, just before we get to a couple other areas, 401k plans, a must-have benefit for job seekers. So I think what's interesting here is you look, 90% of employees, or 9 out of 10, would not take a job if it didn't offer a 401k plan. So, you start seeing some of these statistics, you start seeing some of the challenges. We're going to talk about some of the other challenges for fiduciaries to have in managing their plan. But at the end of the day, you might say to yourself, well, why do I have one? Why do I want to put myself through that? Well, really because, it is becoming a need for plan sponsors to be able to offer, because in order to stay competitive in your industry, to competitive in the workforce, got to be able to offer these types of benefits. So outside of some of those statistics and some of those challenges, really, what's been the most interesting area over the last couple of years has really been around two pieces. One, 401k plan litigation, which we're talking about here. So what I wanted to do is just highlight a couple of the interesting cases that we've seen over the years that have really kind of led us to, I think, where we are today. One on the top there, Fidelity employees versus Fidelity. I think this was an interesting case, and we've seen this. It's not only, I highlighted Fidelity here, but there's really been a lot of others just like this that have had the same type of lawsuits. But Fidelity employees sued Fidelity because Fidelity was profiting at the expense of its workers by offering high-cost fund options, charging excessive fees for plans of its size. And really what this kind of, to summarize this, what was happening here is Fidelity was offering a lot of Fidelity funds, right? And they were at higher expense ratios than they needed to be. And at the end of the day, the employees were saying, you're telling me that out of the universe of mutual funds out there, over 18, almost 19,000 available mutual funds, our Fidelity mutual funds are the best across the board, and should be the only ones that are offered, and should be the only ones offered in our plan. And unfortunately, it couldn't be justified. There were some of the Fidelity funds were fine and could have been left. Some were not performing as well as they should have been. Some were using higher fees than they needed to be. And Fidelity ended up having to settle that lawsuit and pay some restitution back to the participants around that. Tussey versus ABB, the second case there, fiduciaries never calculated the amount of the record-keeping fees paid to the record keeper via the revenue sharing arrangements it had. And really, this is really a big area of focus for plan sponsors over the last couple of years, really since 2012, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Hint, probably one of the fiduciary chaps I'll be talking about. But it's really important for fiduciaries to really understand the fees that are being charged from their plan across all aspects: investments, services, record-keeping services, provider services, et cetera. And in this case here, Tussey just never really, versus ABB, Tussey never never really calculated those fees and understood their revenue sharing arrangements that were going on, and participants are just paying much more than they should have for the services that they're getting, or they could have gotten the same types of services at much less cost with another provider or negotiated lower fees. And really, at the end of the day, the fiduciary was responsible for that and had to pay some restitution back to the participants. Tibble versus Edison International, I think one of my favorite cases, probably one of the most talked about cases also out there. This was a breach duty of prudence by investing in retail versus institutional share classes. And really, I can explain this best by that chart down below there. And if you look down below, there's a chart of investments. This is just a popular large growth fund growth fund that's out there, and it comes in 6 different share classes. You can see down the left-hand side, R1 through R6, and really you can see the performance on the fund for the 1 year, 3, 5, and 10 year, and really the only difference in these funds. So when I say the only difference, the way these funds are invested, what mutual stocks are being purchased, what the strategy that the investment manager is taking, it's all exactly the same. There's no difference in any of those aspects. The only difference comes in those expense ratios. And if you look on the second to last column there from the right, it says expense ratio. You can see, the R1 share class is 144 basis points, or 1.44%, and the R6 is 0.34%. So really, it's in the response of why would anybody ever want to pay 144 basis points when they have the option to pay a lower expense ratio? And that's really what summarizes what the Tibble versus Edison International case was, is they were using higher share classes. It was a super large plan. They had options to use the lowest share classes available, and nothing was ever done to review that aspect and see that it was available and move in that direction. So that turned out to be a very big case, and really we see a lot of this now. And yes, it will probably be another fiduciary trap to avoid later on, but really having something in place to be able to make sure you're continuing to monitor that has become extremely, extremely important for plan sponsors or fiduciaries to look at. And then lastly, and I won't go into them, but just to highlight, there's been a lot of cases around 403B type plans lately, really hitting a lot of very large institutions, universities and financial educational institutions. And you can see, some of the most recent cases, Yale, Duke, MIT, NYU, Princeton, all really, have had cases brought against their retirement plans recently. And we haven't seen sort of results from those yet, but they're all out there in open cases that are being looked at. So with that litigation, sort of what ended up happening, and this is sort of the last area before we get to the fiduciary traps, is really comes from some of the trends that we've seen from the Department of Labor. And I think as a result of sort of the need for participants and the fact that we are in a retirement crisis and participants really aren't saving enough within their defined contribution plan. And 2, the litigation that has come out over the last couple of years, I think the Department of Labor has really kind of stepped up their game with retirement plans, 401k and 403b plans, and they're getting very aggressive on auditing these types of plans nowadays. And as you can see here, there's been an increase. They continue to increase every year the amount of audits that they're doing. On averaging, they're auditing and closing approximately 4,000 investigations per year. They've increased the amount of auditors over the last couple of years by adding over 1,000 more investigators. And really, 3 out of 4 of the audits that they're doing had some type of violation. So really, 75% of the audits that are being done are found with some type of violation, deficiency, or something. And the average cost for a plan to correct that violation, on average, is coming out to be around $450,000. So it's really, again, now, in full disclosure, this is definitely, we're seeing most of the audits are still happening in the very large plan space. But I'll tell you, we're definitely starting to see that, that come down space too. And really, at the end of the day, the number one reason any one plan will be audited, number one reason, hands down, is really you have an employee call up and say, the Department of Labor, and say, hey, I work for the ABC company, and I'm not really sure they're doing something right. This is what's happening. the next day that auditor will be in there really looking to, to audit that plan. That's the number one reason is really a complaint from an employee or somebody to the Department of Labor, and that'll open up an audit for that plan. Number two reason is really information that is prepared on the Form 5500 that plans are required to complete every year. And number three is it's random. There are random audits being done out there. Obviously, with how many audits are being done, I think those random audits are less than or few and far between. But there's still the opportunity to get just a random audit out there. And those audits have gotten very complicated. This is just for illustration purposes. This is an example of what the Department of Labor is looking for during that audit. You can see here, questions 1 through 15 of the information they're looking for: plan documents, summary plan descriptions, trust agreements, fiduciary liability insurance policies if applicable, in balance sheets and statements of assets or liabilities, recent determination letters. So it's actually really, really extensive of really what they're looking for. And to be honest with you, this is really just page 1. There's a second page. You can see here, this is numbers 16 through 23 of what they're looking for. And take a notice of number 16, and look, you have subsets A through L. That's just on fees alone. That's really what they're looking for, just on making sure plan sponsors are understanding their fees. That's how important it's gotten. So it's really, they've really upped their game on this stuff, and fiduciaries and plan sponsors really need to make sure that they have a process in place, to protect themselves against these types of audits and situations. So with that said, let's get to our fiduciary traps and why I think it's so important and to have a process around, to avoid these traps and have a process around, protecting yourself as a plan sponsor or fiduciary. Number one trap, the plan's record keeper drives the plan's decision. We see this a lot where, plans are set up or plans have been operating and, changes want to be made, and plan sponsor or fiduciary will say, hey, I want to go and change this and this and this. And I say, well, you really can't change that because it doesn't work on our record keeping system. Well, that's, number one trap is you can't let the record keeper drive those decisions. Obviously, the record keepers have completely opposite goals in mind than plan sponsors. Record keepers want to provide, and there's a lot of good ones out there, but they really want to provide the least amount of service to a plan and charge the most amount of fees, right? That's really their goal. As a plan sponsor, as a fiduciary, you want the complete opposite. You want to pay the lowest fees and you want to get the most service. So really, you can't let that record keeper drive those decisions. There's a lot of platforms out there that require you to use their proprietary funds to be on that platform. Not saying that they're not the right funds to be on there, but that's not a good practice to have a plan. Hence, go back to the Fidelity lawsuit. Have a plan on a Fidelity platform or a Principal or Nationwide platform. Use all of their proprietary funds. And then, you need to understand the provider's services and support and how much that cost is. And, it's becoming really complicated to do that, but there are certain benchmarking services they need to follow, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Additionally, we've come across some record keepers that, will also give pushback on what types of features you may be able to offer in a plan, such as, loans, or they'll make it very complicated process for a plan sponsor to have loans in the plan and put so much more responsibility on a plan sponsor, just trying to, deter them from actually offering loans. So at the end of the day, it's, less of a service on that record keeping side, and obviously from a cost perspective, they can, remove that service and still, maybe still keep their cost high. We've had some auto enrollment. I don't know if hopefully you all know what auto enrollment is, but it's really kind of an area that has taken off over the last 3-4 years. Auto enrollment and auto increase, both of those there in that list. But really, a lot of record keepers will also push back because they'll say it adds a lot of administrative responsibility, and it does. But the benefits totally outweigh the administrative responsibility, and a lot of those record keepers will push back and say, you don't really want auto enrollment. You're going to have to do this, and this, and really, those record keepers are able to really do those services for you if you discuss it and push them, correctly. So really, it's, again, just whatever decision being made, make sure that record keeper is really not driving that decision. And if they are driving that decision or pushing you a certain way, make sure you really understand all your alternatives and document everything properly going forward. Fiduciary trap number 2, having a lackadaisical approach to understanding plan fees. We talked about plan fees a lot, and probably in the first half of this presentation I've said fees a couple dozen times, but really it's become extremely, extremely important. Back in 2012, the Department of Labor put out required disclosures out there for plan sponsors. Really what that said was all providers of 401k plan, all service providers had to disclose to the plan sponsor the fees that were being charged. And that was all great, but the issue with that is it also put an additional responsibility on the employer to have to do something with that. You can't just get this information and really kind of put it in a drawer. You really need to kind of dissect it, understand it. And you can see it's not simple here. You can see all these different areas of potential services and fees that may be charged: record keeping, compliance, and investment management, communications, and technology. And then on top of that, how is those services being billed, or how are those fees being billed? Is it through revenue sharing arrangements, or are there asset-based fees? Is it participant fees, investment management fees? So you really need to kind of, really dissect it and look under the hood and understand what those fees are. And really, there's that legal obligation there for those fiduciaries now, because of that disclosure requirements, to be able to really to understand that. So a couple of areas to look out for: having little or no knowledge as to the nature and extent of compensation paid to a 401k plan service provider may enable the service provider to collect excessive fees. I'm personally dealing with a situation now where we've taken over as advisor of a plan, and we lowered some of the expense ratios on the funds to make sure we're using the lowest expense ratios. We reduced some of the revenue sharing arrangements, and now that the record keeper's kind of coming back and wanting to put an additional fee on top of it after they realize all that. So again, it's just a matter of kind of understanding that and making sure it is a reasonable type fee. So we're going to go through a benchmarking process now to see if that additional fee makes sense and what we're getting for that fee. But it's fairly tricky out there, and you need to understand that. Having no understanding of what constitutes a reasonable fee. This I found very interesting is, when the DOL came out with those disclosure requirements around fees, it did say you need to, now that you have your fee, you need to do a study and find out if it's reasonable. But there really was nothing out there to say, well, what's reasonable, right? What does reasonable mean? It can mean a lot of different things. And so really it's kind of put more responsibility and on a fiduciary and a plan sponsor to benchmark those fees and say, well, is it reasonable? And a couple ways to benchmark. There's various benchmarking service or applications out there that you could utilize that'll give you a very high level understanding of your plan's fees and services you're getting versus what others in the industry of your similar plan size are paying also. But really the other best way to go about it is to really do some type of RFP every about 3 years, do a formal RFP, which will allow the service provider to come back with the true understanding of what you're paying and the fee and the services you're getting, and then you can also get services similar type of summary from 1 or 2 or 3 other record-keeping platforms out there that will give you the same type of response. So now you can do a true apples-to-apples comparison and say, okay, well, for this service provider, my service provider, they're charging me X, the others are charging Y and Z, but honestly, they're all within reason, or I'm getting more services for the X fee. So, of course, it makes sense. So that's really that RFP process, or every 3 years, has become one of the best ways to go about doing that. And then really the best practices, just to close out this slide here, review service provider fees annually against reliable indicators, and that's benchmarking and those and such as that, or the RFP process. Be able to break out fees for each service. Again, that's become extremely important. Remember back to this slide, so many different services out there. Really, you got to be able to kind of outline them and break them out and understand what you're getting for those services, and the fees that are being paid for each of those services, and have an effective approach to determine what is reasonable. And we talked about that. And then understanding that nature and extent of the asset-based fee versus, wrap fees or participant fees or, of that nature. So how are those fees really being applied? Trap number 3, not having and executing on the investment policy statement. So just here what's important is, I think, this has been kind of, for the last 10 years, everyone talks about an IPS, investment policy statement. And the IPS is extremely important, really drives the overall investment philosophy of the plan, investment decision-making process. But what's interesting about here is really what I highlighted in red is that execution on the IPS strategy. So we've seen a lot of plans where we'll come in, we'll do a review of that plan, we'll say, can I see a copy of your IPS? And sure, we have it, it's here, no problem. And I'll look at it and I'll go through the IPS and it'll be 4 or 5 areas that clearly identify situations where investments are in the plan or should not be in the plan, and they're still in the plan. And I say to yourself, well, here, great, you have an IPS, but you're not really executing on it. And I'll tell you, the Department of Labor will take more, it's actually almost more of will kind of focus more on the fact that you're not executing on your IPS versus not even having an IPS altogether. So, we've seen situations where you should have an IPS. Truth of the matter is it's not a full requirement. There's nothing in the regulations that say that, but you should have it. But if you do have one, executing on that is extremely, extremely important to do. And then I'll just throw the one last tip in there on the bottom. You can see slightly there, it says target date retirement funds, tips for ERISA plan fiduciaries. And just why I threw that in there was, a couple of years ago, the Department of Labor actually came out with tips that they recommend for reviewing your target date funds. Now, hopefully everybody knows what a target date fund is, and you all have them within your plan. But most plans nowadays, and 95% have target date funds, and they use those target date funds as the default investment option in the plan, which basically means that if you're not, if a participant doesn't make an election or an allocation on how their money should be invested, they'll get defaulted into their age-appropriate target date fund. So really, for most plans we see on average, probably 60-70% of the assets in the plan typically reside in those target date funds. But what I notice a lot is a lot of those IPSs don't really have anything specific on how you go through that target date fund review. So extremely important that if you do have that IPS, and again, following through and executing on that there is specifically a section in that IPS on your target date fund review process. What are you doing to review those target date funds, to understand them? We've had situations where the Department of Labor has audited a retirement plan, and they'll specifically ask questions on those target date funds to the point where they'll say, what was your methodology for using a to fund versus a through fund? These are 2 different types of target date funds that are available, but they're getting so granular to asking those types of questions now. So it's become extremely important that you have all that IPS in place, and you're really kind of addressing all of your investment areas of your plan. Trap 4, having an ineffective plan investment committee. This is probably summarizes a lot of what we're going to talk about here, meaning at the end of the day, having an investment committee. If you don't have an investment committee today that's meeting periodically every year, that's probably your the biggest concern you should have within your retirement plan. Really, it's come down to the fact that, the Department of Labor and really within the industry, what's most important is they want to see individuals are meeting periodically and discussing the provisions of the plan, discussing things such as the investments or your plan policies, such as your loan policy, talking about changes within the IRS and DOL and audit needs, reviewing participant disclosures. So this is a sample of a quarterly investment sort of agenda that we kind of follow. Obviously, you don't have to have meetings quarterly; you can have them semi-annually. But what's important is to be able to come up with some type of effective investment committee agenda and process, and to be able to make sure you're following that through year in after year out, having discussions and really talking about these different areas. Trap 5, fund lineup creep. So many plans we see, they were set up 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they'll have an investment lineup selected for the participants to choose from, but nothing's ever done about them. It's been the same funds that they've had in the plan for years, and nobody ever replaces them. And that's one of, an area that the investment process that, really should be followed should be very comprehensive. As part of that investment committee meeting, again, our recommendation is you should be talking about investments at every single committee meeting always. Doesn't have to be the full amount of the meeting. It shouldn't, take up the whole part of it, but it should be a portion of your committee meeting should be about, having and conducting a comprehensive investment review, and, talking about these different areas. What kind of research and analysis is being done on your investments to make sure that they are the right investments within the plan. What's the selection process that's being followed when you are looking at replacing a fund or adding a new fund? And, what's the monitoring process, right? What are you going to do ongoing to make sure those funds continue to perform in line with, the goals you're wanting to continue to achieve with those funds, and within, the investment policy statement guidelines. And, to break it out even further, our suggestion is, really to break it out into 3 different areas. One, there should be a specific review, on your core lineup decisions. These are, the individual asset class funds that are being offered. Discuss on what should be offered. What's the right mix for your participants and the plan demographics that, that are within your plan? What kind of knowledge does your participants have? If they're very knowledgeable in investments, you might want to offer a more diversified and expanded investment menu. Maybe if they're not as knowledgeable, you want to, offer them a more basic investment menu that allows them just to, hit certain retirement savings goals and means. So having those types of discussions around the core lineup is the, one area that we suggest breaking your investment discussions up into. Obviously, we talked about target date funds before a little bit, but this is always definitely another area. These should be reviewed at every investment committee meeting, but even more, they should go through a very formal review every at least year to 2 years on your target date fund family. Is it still suitable for your participants and your plan and the goals you're looking to achieve? Mainly, again, because it is your default investment option. Most likely it's your QDIA, which is your qualified default investment option within your plan, which means it's giving you a safe harbor protection that when you default participants into this fund, you get safe harbor protection from the Department of Labor. But because it has all those requirements on there, you really need to take a very strong approach on how you go about analyzing and reviewing that fund. And then the last piece that we suggest is really having a discussion separately on your stable value fund process. We still see a lot of plans out there today that offer money market. Money market really for years have been paying nothing. I think now it's paying about, 0.2 to 0.5% return. But there are certain funds out there, such as stable value funds, that offer capital preservation and are paying upwards of anywhere between 1.5 to almost 3% return. So there's a really good place for that. But there's a lot of variations that should be considered. But stable, in our opinion, every plan should have a stable value fund to be able to provide that capital preservation fund for your participants. Trap 6, and then 2 more to go. No understanding of your plan security protocols. This is very new. Probably within a year ago, you wouldn't have seen this out here, but with all the cybersecurity stuff going on, with all the issues that we've had with Home Target, Home Depot being hacked, even I think the FBI, right, got hacked a couple years ago. I mean, really, everywhere we see now there's situations where individuals are, getting hacked. And obviously, as part of your fiduciary requirements now, you really need to make sure you understand what are your security protocols around your 401k plan to protect yourself and your participants' assets within that plan. Matter of fact, quite interesting was I had a friend of mine who told me that he was at a very popular record-keeping provider's platform, and they had, as he's doing a walkthrough of their facility, there's a big screen up on the side of the wall, and there's a number there, and it keeps going up. And then he's like, "Oh, what is that number?" And they said, "Oh, that's how many times somebody's trying to hack into us and get through our firewall." And the number just kept going up like a counter. because honestly, with these types of institutions, it happens. There are so many situations out there where plans are being hacked. So really, as a fiduciary, taking on more of a serious role in understanding your security protocols has become another added responsibility. And some things to do to minimize the risk is conduct due diligence by completing a risk analysis for the plan. Put in place cybersecurity policies and procedures, ensure all employees get well trained in them, and I think this is important. Anybody who's really truly working on your retirement plan should be trained on what are those cybersecurity procedures. I still have some clients who baffles me, but wants to send me Social Security numbers through email. That should never happen. So things like that, everyone should be well trained and understood that, there's certain procedures you really can't follow. Conduct a thorough usage analysis to identify every party with access to the retirement plan data. Make sure you understand who does that. And again, this is something I suggest every year. Every piece of equipment that may contain personal identification, know what that equipment has that information. Which vendors need which data. Obviously, make sure if you're using different vendors, do they really need all the data? Maybe putting some measures in place to say, hey, you don't need that, we don't need that. To kind of keep less data from flowing around. Protocols use to transfer files and data to vendors in their security. I know we've set up like a secure 256-bit secured vault system that we share data with our clients on. We have access. They have sign-in access with two-factor authentication to get into it. So it really kind of puts additional procedures in place. And then, there are potential for getting insurance and coverage for cybersecurity out there now. Matter of fact, some PNC institution that we're very familiar with, they told us this is one of the biggest questions they get now is, what kind of cybersecurity can they provide different institutions? And then and then just verify your vendor security. Ask the questions: what are they doing, and what kind of information do they have around security, and what are they doing to protect your and your clients and your participants' data. And then trap number 7, and I think this kind of pulls it all together, having no or sloppy documentation around plan decision making. And this, why I think this is a trap is because really, it comes down to the process that plan sponsors and fiduciaries really need to follow, and that process is to really have, regular committee meetings, discuss the different areas that we've talked about, whether it's security or investments or your vendors, your IPS, all those areas, but really making sure you're clearly documenting what your discussions are about, what decisions are being made, and how you've got to that decision. It's not always about the decision being made. It's about that process you follow to get to that decision. So when we go back and we talk about some of the lawsuits and the fact that some institutions weren't using the lowest share class, it's not necessarily the wrong thing to not use the lowest share class, to make sure you follow the procedure as to why you not, right, and have that documented. Becomes so much more important than really using that lower share class. And all those situations, those fiduciaries weren't able to justify why they didn't use a lower share class because they never had their committee meetings, they never had discussions, they never documented why they were using those share classes in a lot of those situations. So keeping written minutes of every committee meeting, keeping those minutes forever. I don't think that there's a statute of limitations on that. There's not really any kind of documentation, minutes, meeting information you have should be filed away and securely filed away and kept forever because that can always be addressed and pulled out later on. So that's it. I think we're right up against time, maybe another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah. So we do have a question, Brian. If you could maybe read that one, and then I'm going to double check to see if we have any other questions.
One question here that came in: what additional advice or information do you have for a plan that has not had an RFP in many years? That's a great question. Really, it's twofold. One, as I said, we suggest every plan does some type of RFP at least every, 3 years at minimal. If you haven't had an RFP done, I would suggest doing it. I don't necessarily. You don't always have to do a full RFP. There is a possibility to do sort of a shortened version of that. But again, I go back to the fact that at least, every year we do suggest some type of benchmarking of your plan and your services and your fees. And then if you can do, and we do suggest every 3 years to do that RFP process, then I think, you're putting yourself in a good position to further protect yourself. So.
Brian, we have another question. Not sure of the comment under legal obligation. Quote, to prove that they use plan assets to pay reasonable fees. So if you could just clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, so not sure the comment under legal obligations to prove that they use plan assets. So there are different ways that plans, obviously can pay their fees. Majority of plans these days, pay fees from plan assets, which means the participant bears those costs. Those costs can be paid in a number of ways. One, through the funds and through some revenue sharing. Two, through an asset wrap fee, or three, just by straight participant fees. So really, it becomes important to understand again how those fees are being paid by those participants, and making sure that they fully understand what fees are being pulled out.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions. What I did want to let everybody know that's on the call, well, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank Brian for presenting today. It was really informative and very eye-opening. So I wanted to, Brian touched on the topic of cyber security. I wanted to let everyone know that on February 21st, the firm is going to be hosting a cybersecurity event here at the office. We have Jim Matola, who's director of our Forensic Investigations and Risk Mitigation Services Group here at Sobel. He is a former Secret Service, and he'll be here. And the topic is time and money, and most importantly, he's going to cover and really delve more deeper into the topic of what a company needs to do to ensure that they might have the right policies, the right procedures. Maybe they've teamed up with service providers to just make sure that they've covered all angles as it relates to cybersecurity. So if you're available, the information is on our website. And lastly, I'd like to personally invite each of you to our May 1st symposium. It's going to be our 3rd annual symposium, and it's held off-site. Details to follow, but please mark your calendar the morning of May 1st. I don't have anything else. I just want to thank you for attending the webinar, and I wish everyone a very nice and enjoyable weekend, and we look forward to talking real soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.